Today I would like to talk to you about this common belief found inside of Christian culture based on a Bible verse where Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me." And that's true, but it's only part of the story. And the common belief translates into, well, if anyone is telling me anything about God, like they're hearing from God or they're experiencing God, and they're not a Christian, then they must be hearing some false spirit or God. They must be being led astray somehow. So, that verse in John 14:6, is true, but it's only part of the truth because you have to compare it with the other verses that give us the entire picture. What are those other verses? The other verses are John 6:44, where Jesus says, "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him," right? So what do we have? We have the Father drawing before people come to Christ, which might help to explain some people when they start talking about the experiences they've had with God before they're Christians. Want proof from the Bible? Here's 3. Cornelius in the book of Acts, I believe it's Acts 10, he was a very devout man, feared God, prayed constantly, but he didn't know Jesus from a hole in the ground. And what was God's response to him? He specifically sent Peter to go lead him to Christ. He's like, hey, I love that story because it says in there, in any nation, anywhere, someone that fears God is welcome to him. That's one of my favorite Bible verses. I love that. Right? So that's example number 1. Example number 2 is Lydia in Acts 16, who was what? She was a worshiper of God long before she met Jesus. And what was God's response to her? Since she worshiped him long before she knew Jesus and who he was, he sent Paul and Timothy. She lived in Philippi. And she sent Paul and Timothy to lead her to Christ. He's like, hey, I love that you love me. Let me show you what I have provided, who I have provided, to come to me and to know me more fully than you do. Right? And here's an example number 3. The Ethiopian eunuch came all the way from Ethiopia. He was the treasurer of, anyways, that's not important, but he came all the way from Ethiopia to where? To Jerusalem. Because he knew, like, that was God's chosen city, right? What did he come for? I believe this might be Acts 10. But he came to worship. Okay? I think it's Acts 8, actually. He came to worship. He came to Jerusalem to worship. Right? And what was God's response to him? God sent Philip to him while he was driving home. He was in his chariot, and the Ethiopian was reading the book of Isaiah. He was talking about Jesus, one of the prophecies about him, and God sends Philip to go talk to him and to lead him to Christ. 3 clear examples in the Bible, much less the examples around us, if you talk to people enough and listen to them, of God working with people and people knowing him and honoring him long before they come to Christ. And so what does God do? He honors what Jesus said in John 6:44, and he leads them to Christ. How about that? So, and there's one more verse where Jesus says, he who has heard and learned from the Father will come to me. So we have 2 verses where Jesus is talking about God's activities and God working with people before they come to Christ. And then he also says, right, but ultimately they come through me. What does this tell us? This tells us that attitude in the church of totally shutting down anybody who's not a Christian if they talk about hearing from God is incorrect. It's very biblical. You can't take one Bible verse and just build an incorrect theology around it. Thank you, and have a nice day.